Hello, hello. I'm Jordan, a knitter and designer here in Georgia, and this is Andalusia Knits, my YouTube channel where I talk about all things knitting. And today I have a bit of a follow-up video for y'all. So a couple weeks ago, I released a video sharing some tips on how to knit socks that last a really long time. And that video blew up better than anything I have released in my entire time on YouTube. And so I wanted to do a follow-up video to that one because there were some really great questions and comments on the original. And I wanted to go back and clarify some things that I said. And I also want to share in this video some new tips as well in terms of like aftercare for your socks that can help extend the life of your socks. And so I have a ton again to talk about, so I want to go ahead and get started. I would encourage you though, if you enjoy knitting videos like this, to go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss an upload from me. But with that, let's go ahead and get to the sock knitting tips, part 2. One of the most frequent questions I got on that last video was what kind of non-superwash yarn would I recommend for knitting socks? And so I will take you through the general qualities I would look for in a non-superwash yarn, and then I'll also talk a little bit about the specific yarn I use and why those two things are kind of at odds with one another. So in terms of general qualities, number one, you want a multi-ply yarn. There are tons of beautiful, fancy single-ply yarns out there these days, but a single-ply yarn is simply not going to be strong enough to hold up to the wear and tear of a sock. And while you do want some felting, I talked about that in the last video, a single-ply yarn is just going to really want to go crazy. It's going to have a lot less things preventing it from felting. And on top of that, it very well might not even get to the felting process at all because single-ply yarns are a bit weaker than multi-ply yarns, and so you very well may wear a hole in the sock before it even has an opportunity for the fibers to felt together. So number one, definitely look for a multi-ply yarn. I mean, two plies is better than one ply, but I would say start in the 3 to 4 range and go from there for socks. And on top of that, you're also going to want to look at how tightly twisted the yarn is, how tightly those plies are twisted together. So to do this, I would simply recommend taking a length of the yarn that you're thinking about and holding it so that it's dangling down vertical like this in front of you, and look at the ridges between the plies that are formed when they're twisted together. And in most yarns, those ridges are going to be somewhat like diagonal, but the more horizontal those ridges appear, the tighter the twist on the yarn is, and that is going to help with wear and tear. And then additionally, while this isn't maybe as important of a prerequisite as those other two, if you can find a non-superwash wool that's blended with a little bit of mohair or a little bit of silk, that is going to add some reinforcement as well. So while I rely on the felting of my socks on the inside to do most of the heavy lifting in terms of keeping them from developing holes, mohair and silk are both sometimes used as a natural alternative to nylon, although I don't particularly find that as essential for my socks as I do looking for a high twist and looking for multi-ply yarn. Now, I've said all that, but the reality is a little bit different for my socks. So all of the socks that you saw in the last video and most of the socks in my collection I have, these are all knit with Wool of the Andes Sport Weight from Knit Picks. And if you're familiar with this yarn, then you know that it is a very common and very affordable yarn that is not necessarily everybody's favorite to work with. But in terms of twist, it is not particularly the most tightly twisted yarn I've ever encountered. And while that would be a bad thing, like all of the other elements that go into like creating a sock with longevity, like the dense gauge and that sort of thing, those can sort of help counteract maybe the weaker points with your yarn choice. So it's a little bit of a do as I say and not as I do type scenario. But that being said, like those guidelines, those are great if you want to find a yarn that you can feel fully confident that you're going to have a durable pair of socks on the first try. But if you're like me, someone who doesn't mind doing some experimenting, there's no reason that you have to go out and buy a specific non-superwash yarn to try knitting your socks in for the first time. Just, if you have something like Wool of the Andes, like a budget style wool around, give it a try and, go from there. I'm very happy with the results I've gotten from Wool of the Andes, even though on paper it's not necessarily the most perfect non-superwash wool for knitting socks in. I want to take a moment to address a point in the last video that I don't think that I explained clearly enough. There seemed to be a little bit of confusion and some questions around it, so I want to talk a little bit more in this video about felting. So in the last video, the example I gave for felting is the classic textbook example where you accidentally put a wool sweater into the washing machine and you take it out and it's like 20 sizes smaller than it was when it went in. And while that is technically felting, it gives the wrong impression in this scenario because that makes it seem like felting is a one-time event. It's a one and done sort of thing. Like a fabric is not felted until it becomes fully felted. But that's not really quite the case with how felting works. There are degrees of felting, and so the socks, yes, obviously we don't want the socks to like shrink to 20 sizes too small. We need them to stay relatively the size of our foot. So I'm talking about not felting that you get from putting these in the washing machine, which you should not put these in the washing machine, and I will address how to wash these in this video as well. It's the natural felting that happens as you wear your socks, simply because the act of wearing socks creates heat, moisture, and friction as you wear them. In the washing machine, like every part of the knitted fabric is taking a beating. Every part is relatively, if you're doing it correctly, is roughly getting felted as the same rate as every other part of the garment. But with the natural felting that happens when you wear your non-superwash socks, that's not what is going on. There are some places in your socks that are going to experience more heat, more friction, and more moisture than others. And so those places are going to felt faster and more than the areas of the sock that are not experiencing the friction and the moisture and the heat as much. So it's not going to be one of those things where like you wear your socks one time and then they're like baby size socks. It's not going to happen like that. It's not going to happen immediately, like as if you put them in the washer. And it's not going to happen to like those comic proportions that we see when wool things get shrunk in the washer. And so I will go ahead and put up on the screen right now some close-ups of the inside of one of my socks so you can see better what I'm talking about. And you'll really be able to notice that the felting is mainly reserved to the toe area and the heel area. Those are the two places that are taking the most friction when you walk generally. But the rest of the underbody of the foot, while it is a little bit felted because it is being walked on all the time, it's not nearly the middle of the foot is not nearly as felted as the two extremes. And when you look at like the leg, it has basically no felting at all because it's taking minimal friction, compared to the foot of the sock. And so when I talked in that last video about how you want your socks to felt on the inside, I'm not talking about that sort of catastrophic washing machine felting where you pull it out and everything is now super teeny tiny. I was talking more about sort of the natural, gradual felting progression that you get as you wear a non-superwash sock or any sort of garment. This sort of like heat and friction from your body is going to naturally, over time, begin to gently felt the fabric. And so I actually had a question or a comment. Someone was asking if I knit my socks slightly longer than my foot so that as they felt, they will shrink to the correct size. And I've heard that advice before from other people. The commenter mentioned where she heard it from, and I can't remember exactly who it was, but I've heard that advice before too. And really, no, I don't do that. I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea because with any sort of felting, even this gradual natural felting, like there is going to be some shrinkage. But as far as I found, like even my socks that are now, a few years old at this point, the felting that happens doesn't really like shrink them to uncomfortable proportions. If anything, it just helps like better conform the bottom of the sock to the shape of my foot. I mentioned earlier in the felting section that these are not socks that can be put in the washing machine. You're going to have to hand wash your non-superwash socks. That being said, it's not as catastrophic as it may sound. I know the thought of hand washing socks sounds really stupid and tedious, but I have a method for caring for my socks that is really as painless as hand washing can be. So the first thing you're going to need to wash your hand knit socks is super duper hot water. Now, I know that the conventional wisdom says that you don't want to use hot water when you're washing and blocking your knits because it can promote felting. But there's a couple reasons why that is not the case. Now, the first reason is that the socks are already being felted from wear anyways, so like that's okay. Like they're going to be felted anyways. But second of all, the felting that happens from hand washing is so minimal. For the longest time, I was very afraid that when I blocked and washed my hand knits, that one wrong move and the whole thing was just going to immediately become a felted hot mess. But wool is a lot more resilient than some of us, including myself, give it credit for. And so the hot water, as long as you're not like in the water, like playing washing machine with your forearm or whatever as the agitator, like just putting your socks in hot water is not going to immediately ruin them. It's not going to immediately felt them. And you absolutely need the hot water because socks are very gross and they need all the help they can get to release that grossness so that you've got clean socks. In most cases, a wool wash will be more than enough to get the job done. So I particularly use Eucalyptus, but any sort of wool wash you can find at like yarn stores or things like that, craft stores, should be okay. That being said, like if your socks are looking or smelling particularly gnarly, every once in a while it doesn't hurt to use a more traditional conventional detergent that you might get like at a grocery store or Walmart, something like that. Now that being said, those are not always great to use on a regular basis for wool-based items, but like every once in a while if something is just really gross and it just needs a heavier dutier clean than what you get with a wool wash, then it's fine. They're not going to dissolve in the wash with one use of a regular detergent. And so from there I've got a pot with my hot water and my wool wash in it, and from there I just dump the socks in and I let them set until the water is cool enough that I can comfortably put my hands in it to reach in and grab the socks out. And from there, it's pretty standard, wringing them out. I'll lay them on a towel and roll it up and step on it and then lay them flat to dry. And so, yeah, that is a little bit more work than just throwing them in the washer and the dryer. But that being said, in terms of hand washing, like it could not be easier. The socks are not things that you have to baby and not things you have to like worry about doing a lot of serious damage to in the course of washing them. In the original Sock Tips video, I offered some general advice about fit and how your sock needs to be smaller than the actual measurements of your foot, but I stopped short of offering any specific advice because just depending on the specific measurements of your foot and what kind of heel construction you're doing, not all advice is going to be applicable to all scenarios. But that being said, there actually is one fit scenario that I think applies to most different constructions, and it's one that really annoys me. And so I wanted to offer a tip for how to deal with a leg of a sock that is too loose. So in terms of most people's feet, the heel diagonal is going to be the point that is the largest on the foot. And I will put up a graphic here pointing out where exactly the heel diagonal falls, but it's basically the circumference point on your foot that is wider than any other circumference point on your foot. And so if we look at the sock, the leg of the sock, this part here before the heel begins, it has to pass over the heel diagonal area. Now, it doesn't have to hang out there permanently like the actual part of the sock that covers the heel diagonal does, but this top part of the sock has to move over the heel diagonal to put the sock on. And so if you've ever had a sock that just won't go over your heel, that's the exact problem you're encountering, is that your heel diagonal is too big relative to the circumference of your leg. And so the obvious solution is to knit the leg larger so that the heel diagonal can be accommodated as the leg passes over it. But unfortunately, at least for me and for a lot of people, the circumference that I need to pass over my heel diagonal is way too big to fit snugly on my leg. And there is a traditional solution to this problem if you have loose legs on your sock, and that is to do 2x2 rib for the entire length of the leg. And as you can see, I don't do that. And I don't do that because I don't like the way that it looks. And that is such a petty excuse. That's such a petty reason for not doing this thing that would make my socks fit better. But that's where I'm at. I much prefer just like a couple inches of 1x1 ribbing at the top of the leg and then some stockinette before we hit the heel. I don't want to do 2x2 ribbing for the entire length of the leg, even though that would solve the problem, because while it's still going to be stretchy enough to get over the heel diagonal, at rest 2x2 ribbing cinches in more than 1x1 or stockinette, and so it's going to conform to your leg better. But there is another solution that I actually learned from sweater knitting. So in sweater knitting, loose cuffs are another problem. If you got like your sleeves are just sort of dangling and they won't stay in place, what you can do is take some elastic thread and run it along the inside circumference of the cuff and cinch it up like a drawstring, and that will create enough like tightness that it will grip back to your wrist. But you can also do that on the cuffs of your sock. And so if you find that the legs of your socks are chronically loose, I would absolutely recommend going out and buying a spool of elastic thread, which is basically just like sewing thread, but stretchy, made out of elastic. I bought this giant thing, this giant spool on Amazon for like $4 maybe a few years ago. And this thing is going to last me a lifetime, I'm pretty sure. So I will throw up another close-up video here showing you the process of threading the elastic through the cuff. But what you're going to want to do is flip the sock inside out and run the elastic thread using a tapestry needle underneath both legs of all of the knit stitches on the inside. And so this is fine whether you're doing 1x1, 2x2 ribbing, like any sort of ribbing will work. Just every knit stitch that you encounter on the inside of the cuff, run the tapestry needle under both legs of that. If you want to be really thorough, go and run elastic thread through the top and the bottom of the cuff. And then if you really want to get extra, or if the sock leg is particularly loose, you can actually run the elastic through the stockinette portion as well. You're just going to have to do it through the purl bumps because there won't be any knit stitches on the inside of the work. But this is a really super simple solution that doesn't require you to like do anything different in terms of knitting. It's just something that you can apply to the problem after the fact. Alrighty, well, I think that is going to do it for part 2. I hope that I was able to clarify some things from the original video, and I hope you've gotten some new tips as well to try out for your socks. As always, if you have any additional questions about sock knitting, please leave those in the comments below, and I'll do my best to address those, either directly or in a follow-up video to this one. And if you don't want to miss an upload from me, I would highly encourage you to subscribe to the channel so that you can always see when I've got something new coming up. But beyond that, I think that's going to do it for this episode, and I will see y'all in the next one. Bye!